The 31st of August, 1888. A woman's body was discovered in Bucks Row. Her condition so horrific that police officers couldn't believe it was the work of a human being. But this was only the beginning. Over the next 10 weeks, 4 more murders would follow, and the world would, for the first time, come face to face with a name that remains 137 years later, a mystery: Jack the Ripper. When we think of Victorian London, we often imagine a romantic, elegant city. But Whitechapel, this was the part of London where even daylight felt like darkness. In 1888, the East End of London was teeming with poverty. Refugees flooded in from Eastern Europe, particularly Polish and Russian Jews. Cholera, typhoid, and tuberculosis were common diseases. The streets were narrow and dark, where even the gaslight struggled to penetrate. And for women, there was only one path to survival that society deemed shameful: prostitution. These are the stories of the women who became victims of Jack the Ripper. They were not merely statistics, they were living, breathing human beings. Mary Ann Nichols, known to everyone as Polly, 43 years old, mother of 5 children. There was a time she had a stable family, but alcohol and poverty destroyed everything. On the 31st of August, 1888, she was on the streets for just 4 pence, the price of a night's lodging. Annie Chapman, 47 years old, fighting tuberculosis, a mother of 2 who once lived in a respectable family. On the 8th of September, she had the same desperate need: a few pennies. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, both murdered on the same night, the 30th of September, a double murder that became infamous as the double event. And then Mary Jane Kelly, the youngest victim, only 25 years old, the 9th of November, 1888. Her death was the most brutal of them all. The 31st of August, 1888, 3:45 in the morning, a cart driver named Charles Cross was passing through Bucks Row. In the darkness, he spotted something lying on the pavement. At first, he thought it might be a tarpaulin, but as he drew closer, he discovered a woman's body. Her throat had been cut twice, from left to right. Her abdomen had been mutilated with a jagged, deep wound. When police arrived, they noticed that the body was still warm. This meant the killer had been there only minutes before. The 8th of September, 1888. Just 8 days later, Annie Chapman's body was found in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. This time, the mutilation was even more horrific. Her throat had been completely severed, and her internal organs, the uterus and part of the bladder, had been removed. Dr. George Bagster Phillips, the police surgeon, stated that whoever did this possessed medical knowledge. Someone had performed this act with surgical precision. Panic spread across London. Newspapers printed sensational headlines. The East End lived in fear. This night became one of the darkest in history. 2 murders in a single night. The first victim, Elizabeth Stride. At 1 o'clock in the morning, her body was discovered in Berner Street. Her throat had been cut, but there was no mutilation because the killer had been disturbed. A man named Louis Dienschutz drove his cart into that alley, and his horse sensed the body. Perhaps the killer was there at that very moment, hidden in the shadows. And then, just 45 minutes later, 1 mile away, in Mitre Square, Catherine Eddowes. The condition of her body was so brutal that police officers said they had never witnessed anything like it. Her face had been mutilated, her abdomen had been completely opened, her left kidney and part of her uterus had been removed, and one more thing, a portion of her ear had been cut off. The 9th of November, 1888. This was the final canonical murder, and the most horrific. Mary Kelly lived in a single room at 13 Miller's Court. When the landlord's assistant, Thomas Boer, came to collect rent and knocked at the door, there was no answer. He peered through a crack in the window. What he saw was worse than any nightmare. Mary's body had been mutilated beyond recognition. Her entire abdominal cavity had been emptied. Her breasts had been cut off. Organs had been deliberately placed beside her head. This was the first time the killer had time. It was an indoor murder, and he displayed his full depravity. Initially, this killer had no name. Newspapers referred to him as the Whitechapel murderer or Leather Apron. But on the 27th of September, 1888, the Central News Agency received a letter. This letter was written in red ink. It read, "Dear Boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track." The letter also contained a promise. "The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ears off and send to the police officers, just for jolly, wouldn't you?" And the signature read, "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." At first, police believed it was a hoax, but when Catherine Eddowes' body was discovered on the 30th of September and a portion of her ear was missing, everyone's blood ran cold. Police published this letter in newspapers, hoping someone would recognize the handwriting. But this decision had another consequence. The name Jack the Ripper captured the public imagination. Worldwide, this name became infamous. On the 1st of October, a postcard arrived, written in red ink with apparent bloodstains. "I was not codding, dear old boss. You'll hear about Saucy Jackie's work tomorrow. Double event this time." This postcard was postmarked the 1st of October, one day after the double murder. This meant the letter had been sent before the murders, but delivery had been delayed. On the 16th of October, George Lusk received a package. Lusk was chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, a civilian group assisting the police. The package contained a small cardboard box. Inside was half a human kidney preserved in alcohol. Accompanying it was a letter. "From hell. Mr. Lusk, sir, I send you half the kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you. T'other piece I fried and ate it. It was very nice." Dr. Thomas Openshaw examined the kidney. It was human, from the left side, female, and affected by Bright's disease. Catherine Eddowes' autopsy revealed her left kidney was missing, and medical records indicated she suffered from Bright's disease. So was this truly her kidney, or had someone created an elaborate hoax? To this day, historians remain divided, but one thing is certain: this was the most disturbing Ripper letter. This investigation was conducted by two police forces, the Metropolitan Police and the City of London Police. Chief Inspector Donald Swanson was appointed by Scotland Yard to coordinate the investigation.
Detective Inspector Frederick Aberline, an experienced officer, was sent to Whitechapel. The investigation was massive. Police interviewed over 2,000 people, investigated 300 individuals, detained 80 people, and examined 76 butchers and slaughterers because the killer possessed anatomical knowledge. But every lead ended in a dead end.
The most intriguing suspect was Aaron Kosminski, a Polish-Jewish immigrant. In 1894, Sir Melville Macnaghten, who was chief constable, wrote a confidential memorandum naming 3 prime suspects. One of them was Kosminski. Macnaghten wrote, "He had a great hatred of women, with strong homicidal tendencies." Chief Inspector Swanson also mentioned Kosminski in his personal notes. Sir Robert Anderson, who was Assistant Commissioner, wrote in his memoirs that the killer was a Polish Jew. Aaron Kosminski was admitted to a mental asylum in 1891. His mental health had deteriorated. He suffered from auditory hallucinations and paranoia. However, asylum records indicate he was not violent. His file stated, "not dangerous to others." In 2007, an author named Russell Edwards purchased a shawl at auction. This shawl was allegedly from Catherine Eddowes' murder scene. Edwards commissioned DNA testing. In 2014, he published a book naming Jack the Ripper, claiming that DNA evidence pointed to Kosminski. In 2019, the Journal of Forensic Sciences published a peer-reviewed article. DNA analysis matched mitochondrial DNA to living descendants of Catherine Eddowes and Aaron Kosminski. However, scientists raised criticisms. Experts from Innsbruck Medical University stated that the shawl's provenance was doubtful. Mitochondrial DNA can only prove relation and cannot provide positive identification, and this DNA profile could match 90% of the European population. So, was Kosminski truly Jack the Ripper, or did police suspect the wrong man? Other suspects included Montague John Druitt, a barrister and teacher whose body was found in the Thames in December 1888. Suicide. Michael Ostrog, a Russian con man, but records show he was in a French prison when the murders occurred. And then the conspiracy theories. Prince Albert Victor, Lewis Carroll, and even painters and artists. But there is no conclusive evidence for any of them. After Mary Jane Kelly's murder, the killings ceased. After November 1888, there were no more canonical murders. Why? There are theories. Perhaps the killer died. Perhaps he was committed to an asylum. Perhaps he left London. Or perhaps Mary Kelly's murder was so intense that it satisfied his urges. We shall never know. The Jack the Ripper case created a watershed moment in journalism. This was the first international serial killer case. The Elementary Education Act of 1880 had increased literacy in England, and cheap newspapers became widely available. At the peak of the investigation, over 1 million newspapers were sold daily. The media sensationalized the case. Theories spread. Fiction and fact became intertwined. These murders held a mirror up to Victorian society. The East End's poverty, overcrowding, and unsanitary conditions all came under national scrutiny. George Bernard Shaw wrote sarcastically, "Whilst we conventional social democrats were wasting our time on education, agitation, and organization, some independent genius has taken the matter in hand." These murders pushed for social reform. Demands arose to improve conditions in the slums. 137 years later, Jack the Ripper still occupies our imagination. Books, films, television programs, documentaries, new theories emerge every year. Why? Because this is an unsolved mystery. Because the killer left behind a name, Jack the Ripper, but not his identity, because the fog of Victorian London, those gaslit streets, that darkness creates the perfect Gothic horror. But most importantly, because we must remember the victims. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. These were not merely statistics. These were real women, mothers, daughters, sisters. They struggled in poverty. Victorian society marginalized them, and a brutal killer took their lives. Today, in East London, there are graves and plaques in their memory. Historians are now focusing on the victims' stories, not just the killer's mystery, because ultimately, this is their story. Will we ever know who Jack the Ripper was? Perhaps not. Some police files are lost. Others were destroyed during World War II. DNA evidence remains controversial. But this is part of the mystery, a figure in the darkness, hidden in fog, whose identity will forever remain unknown. Jack the Ripper, a name that became legend, a killer who was never caught, and the story of 5 women who must always be remembered. If you enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe. On Victorian Dark Mysteries, we bring you more true crime stories like this. Let us know in the comments below, which suspect do you think is most likely, Aaron Kosminski or someone else? Thank you for watching.